announcements. Okay, let's do some announcements. Monthly learning sponsored by the Grundman and Bearbaum families in memory of Grundman, Tzvi Yosef, and Yitzchak. And the day of learning sponsored by Sari and Russell Mayer and family, and Lisa and Stuart Cohen to commemorate the year side of their dear mother and grandmother, Rita Meyer. Itobad Achava Moshe Halevi on the 28th of Cheshvan. And today's breakfast is sponsored by Abe and Leo Bowski to commemorate the year side of Saul Bowski on the 28th of Cheshvan. All the Neshamos should have an aliyah.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, I gave a talk about burning of the Talmud. And I mentioned there were two major instances. There were other times when this happened too, but one was in 1242, I think it was, in Paris, where they burned 24 carts of Talmud, which was a real disaster. And the other one occurred in Rome, and that was in 1553. And I mentioned that was in response to a conflict that took place between two printers. And in the end, the printers went to the Catholic Church and they issued a decree against the Talmud. But this time, my talk is going to be about what led to that, and that is tshuva of the Ramah regarding these printings. So what happened was, in around 1550, the Maharam of Padua had gone through the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, and he made a number of corrections to the editions that had been published and added a perush. And then he wanted to arrange to get that printed. So where do you go to get it printed? And again, as I think I had mentioned last time, Jews were not allowed to print books in Italy, particularly in Venice, at this time. So you had to go to non-Jewish printers. So the first printer, who started about 1515, was Daniel Bomberg, who was known for printing excellent quality works. And he apparently went out of business around 1548. There's a question as to why he went out of business. Was it that he was just getting old and decided to retire? That's one possibility. The other possibility is that he was now faced competition, and the competition put him out of business. And that is, there was another printer by the name of Justiniani who started around this time. And he was basically took over from Bomberg. So Maharam of Padua went to Justiniani and attempted to reach an agreement that he would print the Mishnah Torah with these new annotations and corrections. And for whatever reason, it seems that they could not reach an agreement. So he then went to another printer by the name of Bragadini. And Bragadini agreed to print the Mishnah Torah, and he did. And then Justiniani says, oh, gee, I'm not going to let him do this. I'm going to reprint it myself. And he then prints a competing edition of the Mishnah Torah. And he puts in the perush of Maharam of Padua, except that in the Bragadini edition, from what I understand, it was put on the page together with the Rambam and other Mefarshim. And Justiniani said, oh, I've checked with some Chachamim and they tell me this perush is no good, but I'm going to print it anyway. And he prints it in the back. And he also says, I am going to be selling my version of the Rambam for 1 gold coin less than Bragadini is charging. So we now have a situation where Justiniani is trying to corner the market and to make it impossible for Bragadini to sell the books that he's printed. Now, the other thing is that it appears that the Maharam of Padua had actually financed the printing. It wasn't that he just entered some kind of agreement and got some of the money, but he actually put down a considerable amount of money to finance the printing. So he's very upset. So what does he do? He contacts the Ramah. Ramah, Moshe Israelis, lived in Poland. This controversy took place in Italy. Apparently, the two of them were related. They were cousins of some sort. And the question is, why did he go to the Ramah? Weren't the Rabbanim in Italy? So first of all, what I understand, he may have contacted some Rabbanim in Italy, and they weren't willing to help him. But secondly, and this I learned when I gave my previous talk about the Lamalshinim Bracha. I said at that time that there was censorship in many places in Europe around the 1500s, 1600s. And all the books that were printed were censored. So they had to print the censored version of the Lamalshinim. But there were a few places, most significantly Amsterdam, where there was no censorship. And nevertheless, they also printed the censored version. And why did they do that? Because the books were sold all over Europe. The books that were printed in Amsterdam were distributed to other countries. And in those countries, the Inquisition and the church would read them. And if they had stuff in there that they had censored, they wouldn't allow them to be sold. So it was in the interest of the printers, even when the printer himself was not directly censored, to print stuff that would be acceptable to the censors. So we have the same kind of thing here, where it seems that the volumes of the Rambam that were printed in Italy were also shipped to Poland and were sold there. Okay, so the Ramah was asked, is this permissible? Of course, remember now, the person who's doing it is Justiniani is not Jewish, he's Goy. Ramah can't order him to do anything. And so the first part of the Shuva talks about Sheva Mitzvah, it's Shuva number 10 of the Ramah. And I could say I started looking at this Shuva. We have a copy of Shiur Shuva's Ramah and Teaneck and Beth Aaron, and I started looking at the thing, and I see a discussion of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and I'm saying, wait, what does that have to do with anything? I want to find out what he said about this printing controversy. And it's very unusual for a tshuva to start this way. Usually a tshuva starts, so-and-so came to me, and they tell me X did something, and then Y did something, and X and Y now disagree, and they came to me, and I have to decide whether X is right or Y is right. This one doesn't do that. It starts off by giving a whole treatise on Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach. And I don't fully understand why he did that. I guess he obviously has to establish that there is some basis for him ruling in this case. And if it was simply a goy and he had no jurisdiction over a goy, why is he even writing a tshuva? So he starts off by, yeah?
But he has jurisdiction, tell people, Jewish people, not to buy it.
Right, yeah, that's correct. But he does have jurisdiction to tell the Jewish people that's what he did in the end. But he first has to establish that there was a violation of Jewish law. Remember, this whole thing involves the fact that this goy reprinted the Rambam. If the goy had the right to do it, he wouldn't feel, yeah, you could say that even so the Jews shouldn't buy it. But his point is that the guy also violated Jewish law. Why? Because Sheva mitzvahs they know include Gezel, Dinim, so what does that mean? The way most people understood that, the way I always understood, is that there has to be some kind of a judicial system. We have here in the United States two judicial systems. That would meet the standards of Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Are all the halachas of that judicial system the same as a Jewish one? The answer is no, but there is a system. And same thing with Gezel. So if I go to your house and you have a computer and I break into your house and steal your computer, clearly I'm violating the law. That's Gezel, that's obvious. But this case is not quite the same thing. He didn't steal anything. He didn't steal any books. He just reprinted the Rambam and said he's selling it for less. Yeah?
So, I mean, I don't know back then, but there are certain things called copyright.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay.
So back then, I don't know if they existed. Okay. If something's like copyright, could you go ahead today, America today, if something's like copyright, could you go ahead and just reproduce it and sell it?
If you take exactly what happened then, remember, we're talking about, first of all, I'll say, from what I understand, there were some copyright laws then. But remember now, we're talking about printing the Rambam Mishnah Torah. That was written like 500 years earlier. The work was, as we would say today, in the public domain. If I want to go today and print a copy of the Rambam, there's no copyright issue there. Any copyright the Rambam had expired long ago. The only kind of copyright there would be is if I took, let's say, Art Scroll, printed a Rambam, and I then make copies of that Rambam exactly as printed by Art Scroll, and then I reprint it. Art Scroll can say, we invested a tremendous amount of money in the font that we use and in the arrangement of everything, and you can't just take that and reprint it, and that would be a valid claim. But that's not what was done here. From what I understand, they completely reset the type and did not use the format of the original printing that what's his name, Bragadini had done. So what the only issue there in terms of actual copyright would be the Perush of the Maharam Padua, and perhaps the fact that he had corrected the Rambam and invested his effort into producing a new edition that was corrected, and that conceivably could have been copyrighted. However, the Ramah does not talk about those specific factors, which is also very interesting. Ramah just talks about the fact that he reprinted the Rambam and did it in an unfair way. So, okay, so we started off with the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach aspect, and the Ramah says that there's a machlokas, but the halacha is that for the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the goyim have to follow the halacha, how we interpret those mitzvahs, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so he says that this non-Jewish printer was obligated to follow whatever the Jewish law is regarding this matter. Now, of course, it's also not so clear what the Jewish law is. So he makes 4 points as to why the Justiniani should not have reprinted it and why that violates Jewish law. So the first thing is, and this is the most important argument, the argument of unfair competition. So he quotes from the Gemara. In the Gemara it says, Rav Huna said, it was a certain resident of an alleyway. Alleyway is like a closed, a dead-end street. That's actually the best way to describe it. You've got plenty of those in Fairlawn here, where you've got a street that dead ends. And he set up a mill in the alleyway and earned his living grinding grain for people. And subsequently, another resident of the alleyway came and set up a mill next to his. The halacha is that the first one may prevent him from doing so if he wishes, as he can say to him, "You are disrupting my livelihood by taking my customers." So this is a clear case. It has nothing to do, by the way, with printing or copyright, but simply a matter of unfair competition. And Rav Huna in the Gemara says that if somebody's got a mill and the other guy wants to set up a mill next to it, he's not allowed to do it because of unfair competition. Okay. So that seems to be pretty clear and simple, except that the Rama points out, the Rith and the Rush say the halacha is not according to the Rav Huna. So, however, he goes on to say that the Mordechai quotes the Abi Asaf, another Rishon, is saying that if it's a closed alley and the second person opens up a mill at the entrance to the alley, that is prohibited. Why? Because everybody's got to go past that new mill to get to this old mill, and presumably they're going to stop at the first mill and not go any further. So that is what we might call predatory competition, and that's prohibited. So the Ramah says that's what we have here, because Justiniani announced that he's selling it for 1 gold coin less, and also the facts indicate he did it just to get back at Bragadini, that he was upset that he didn't get the contract printed, and therefore he did it with specific intent to put Bragadini out of business. And that, according to the Ramah, it violates the halacha. Now, it's interesting. We had about 35 years ago, I don't know if any of you remember, some of you may have been living in Burkeville on 35 years ago, we had the RCBC. And at that point, the RCBC took the view, Hasagas Gavul, which is the Hebrew term for the competition. They would not grant hashgacha to a restaurant that directly competed with another one. And there was a situation where there was one restaurant on Cedar Lane, I think it might have been Shelley's, and then there was a restaurant called Santoro's that decided to open another milchik restaurant across the street. And they at least initially said that they would not give hashgacha to that new restaurant across the street because of Hasagas Gavul. Now, at that point, my uncle was Rabbi David Silver of Harrisburg, who was the son of Rabbi Eliezer Silver, and he was known as a Talmid Chacham. So I asked him, "What do you think of this decision about the Hasagas Gavul?" And his answer was, "No, I disagree." Why? Because Hasagas Gavul applies only in a case where there's room for only one of them. If you opened up a restaurant in a small community and the patronage would be sufficient only to support one restaurant, then Hasagas Gavul comes into play. But Teaneck, and we're even talking about the Teaneck of 35 years ago, had a very substantial number of frum people. And there were also communities in Englewood and Paramus and Fair Lawn and even Muncie, where people could potentially come to Teaneck to eat at the restaurant. And my uncle said, there's room for more than one restaurant in Teaneck. If the question is, does the guy know how to run a restaurant? If he's good, if he knows how to run a restaurant properly, he'll succeed. He'll succeed even if the other one is there. If he doesn't know how to run a restaurant properly, then he won't succeed, but that's not our problem. Halacha doesn't deal with that kind of situation. So my uncle said, there's no reason why they shouldn't give hashgacha. And in the end, the RCBC changed their position and did give hashgacha on either that restaurant or others, and they abandoned the issue of Hasagas Gavul. I mean, of course, as we know, we now have on West Englewood Avenue about 10 restaurants or so, and they don't have any issue of Hasagas Gavul. So anyway, so that was the first, yeah?
So what would you say? Pizza shops, they have 3 pizza shops. like a Teaneck, that are very close to each other. And one day, when he decided on dropping a pie for $2 or $3 less than everybody else is selling, can he do that?
Do it.
No, I'm just saying, now it's going to be a price war to drive down the price.
If it is done specifically with the intent to put the other places out of business, then I would think, I can't speak for my uncle, but I would think in a case like that, it would be us to do it. But if it's just that they want to lower the prices, see, with Justiniani, apparently the facts were that he was a very wealthy person. And he might have been losing money on the sale of these books at this lower price, but he didn't care because his intent was to put his competitor out of business. And, in a case like that, the halacha would be you can't do it. But that was the intent here, it seemed. Well, I don't think the Ramah specifically mentioned that. Yeah, so he then goes on, gives 3 more arguments, which are less significant, I think, and also not really relevant to the question on the copyright unfair competition. The first is that talks about the fact that, again, it seems that the Maharam of Padua actually financed this printing of the Rambam. It's not just that he made some kind of agreement. He actually put his money into it, and therefore he says that you have to give priority to a Talmid Chacham. It relates to Gemara where it says, Rav Dimi of Nehardam brought dried figs on a ship to sell them, and the Reish Galusa said to Rava, "See, is he a Torah scholar? And if so, you should reserve the market for him." In other words, declare that he has an exclusive right to sell the dried figs. So he's saying, in this case, since Ramara Mapadua is a big Talmid Chacham, he should have priority for that reason. He also raises the question, and we say Torah should not be kardom lachbarbo. You shouldn't take advantage of the Torah to make money from it. And he rejects that argument and says this is more like the issue of the Kohanim getting portions of the karbanos, Mishulchan Gaboa, that Hashem should provide for Talmidei Chachamim, and therefore it's not wrong for the Maharam Padua to make money from this printing of the Rambam. And then he has the argument that when you buy something, you should give preference to a fellow Jew, even if the price is slightly higher. And again, he's saying that the real party of interest here is not the Bragadini, but the Maharam Padua. And since he's the one making the money out of it, you should purchase his. And then the fourth argument, which, if anything, is a little bit strange. He says that it's usher to have a sacred Torah that's not Mugan. If you have a Torah in your house and it's full of mistakes, and again, I assume we're talking about a situation where we're actually using this Torah to learn from. If you've got an old Torah and you put it in the back of the Oro and the whole thing doesn't apply because you're not using it for any purpose, but you shouldn't be learning from a Sefer Torah that has mistakes in it. Okay, so if he had then gone on to say, and I have read the Justiniani edition and it's full of mistakes, and therefore you can't use it. And he doesn't say that. What he does say is that the Maharam Padua spent a lot of time correcting the text of the Rambam, and that edition printed by Bragadini we know is correct. And he just then says, well, we don't know about the other one. Maybe it has mistakes. Therefore, you should use it, which is not exactly a very compelling argument, but that's, again, not the main argument. So he also says that there's no issue about prohibiting these books, because you might say, if this non-Jewish printer is told that he can't sell his books, he'll stop printing books, and we won't have any place to print Jewish books. And he says, no, we don't worry about that, and all these things he's not concerned about. And so the end of the tshuva is actually very interesting. It's This one, yeah, so he ends by saying, yeah. And we agree that anyone who does so shall suffer the punishment of cherem nidui v'shamsa. And he uses the we, the plural we, and the question is, what does that mean? Some say that he assumed or he expected others were going to join in his ruling. It also could be, and this is, I think, the more likely explanation, like the royal we. When a king issues a proclamation, he uses we, even though he's doing it himself. And here, he's setting himself up as the halachic authority, although it's also very interesting. At the time, he was in his 20s. And the Ramah only lived to be, I think, 42, which is kind of amazing since he's known as such a important halachic figure and wrote some very important halachic works, and everyone knows who he is, but he died at a very young age. And the Maharam of Padua was much older than him, but he ends at Tshuva by saying Hakatan, the lesser one, but it seems that he took it upon himself to issue this with the understanding that people would listen to him. And so what apparently happened is people did listen to him and didn't buy Giustiniani's books. And what's interesting is that Giustiniani soon went out of business. And it was Bragadini who remained a printer, he and his children and his family, for another 100 years or so. He was considered to be a major printer of Jewish books in Venice. And now the sequel also is, as I explained at the last time, that they both started upset, and each one went to the church and said, my rival was printing the Talmud, and the Talmud contains all these blasphemous things against this and that in the church. And so they appointed this commission to investigate, and there were 6 cardinals, and they concluded, yes, it's true that the Talmud contains all these terrible things, and we have to burn the Talmud. And the result was they did burn the Talmud and other books too, including, I'm sure, the very books involved in this dispute were burned in, I think, 1553 in Rome, and then in Venice and other places in Italy. So that was a result of this controversy, rather unfortunate. And it's also, when we talk about burning books, I mentioned that when they did it in 1242, there were no printed books. Every book had to be written by hand. So it was a tremendous tragedy because it took forever to rewrite, copy all the books. Now you had printed books. But it seems that the cost of these books in those days was far greater than the cost of a book today. I mean, if you want to buy a Shas today, you pay maybe $1,000 or something. And $1,000 to most people, it's a substantial expenditure. It's a substantial expenditure, but it's not a significant portion of one's salary. Again, I don't know, but I've seen some sources that say the cost of these books, you might pay half your yearly salary to buy one book. So it was far more significant to burn books even in 1500s than it is today. Today, you could easily get books reprinted at a much lower cost. And I was also thinking, it's not even the question of printing books today. When I started doing some research into this, I found this copy of printed Shuvas Haraman. I copied the pages and started reading them. And then I discovered, because I did some research online, all the Shuvas Haraman are available online. The Sefaria has them all online. So if you lost all your Sefarim, all you gotta do is turn on your computer and you have access to any very important sefer that you want. The whole Talmud is online, the Shuvas Haraman are online, many other books of the Rambam, I'm sure is. So today, burning a book would not be anywhere near as consequential as it was in the 1200s, even the 1500s. So, and finally, this Shuva, the Ramah, has been viewed as one of the, as it says here, primary sources of copyright. This is a website that I found, which talks about copyright. It doesn't talk about halacha, doesn't talk about Ramah, talks about copyright. And yet they cite this tshuva as being one of the first examples of rulings about copyright. As I mentioned, it isn't really copyright. Copyright is a protection of intellectual property. And I'll give an example. Some of you may know or may not know that I love to travel by train. And whenever I travel by train, or any significant trip, I will write a travel log, usually like 8, 10 pages long. And I send them out to my friends. Some of them actually are available online, but I've never printed them. And so if somebody came and it's like, they're going to print my travel logs without my permission, I'd have a right to stop them. Am I being injured by that? No, I never intended to make any money out of these travel logs, and I don't suffer any injury by other people reading them, but they're my property. I wrote them, and I'm entitled to make whatever use of them I want or I don't want. So you have no right to take those and print them. That's what copyright is all about, and I could get an injunction against your using my travel logs and printing them under the US copyright laws, even if I don't show any monetary harm or because it is an injury that you're taking my intellectual property. That's not what the Ramah did. The Ramah didn't talk about intellectual property, just talked about competition with the mill, where one person opened the mill, another person opened another mill, which is not intellectual property at all. But the tshuva is considered to be one of the primary sources of copyright. So it's just a very, very interesting tshuva, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to go over it and discuss this with you.
Mr. Koya, thank you, Daniel.
Okay,
Bench.
I guess somebody else is. And when you get the links to this thing, I like to say, please send me the link. You record it, right?
I sent you the link already one time, but I'll send it to you
Yeah,
again.
okay, fine. Yeah. Just said before.
You send the That was completely cool.
Then they missed you last night. What's going on?
Thank you, Daniel. Very
Okay.
good. Yeah,
Okay.
fish cock.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, next month we have, David Friedman. He's gonna do Wednesdays for the month. You get off this thing here before and he's gonna do tefillah on Wednesday.